everybody, and welcome back to the Refresh Point. My name is Ben, and as always, I'm joined by my constant co-host, Steve. How's it going?
You know what, Ben? I'm having a great week. Just got back from the gym. How's your fitness routine been?
How's my fitness routine been? I go to the rock climbing gym twice a week. That's my routine so far.
I think that's really important because you don't want to go turn to skin and bones. Though it does seem as though skin and bones might be on the menu sooner than we think.
Skin and bones. The skeleton man is incoming for sure. But we'll talk about all that and more in this episode. When we were prepping it, we were considering not spending a lot of time on discussing the San Gabriel regional, depending on the top lists. Like if it was all the same, like the last regional, the same decks we anticipated to make top were the same and all that. No worries, other topics to discuss. Instead, California needs to pass that blunt. We gotta get on the rotation. They've got some lists going on over there. So they're all very interesting. We'll also discuss, as we've alluded to, some of the announcements for English and JP, and end today with a discussion on the evolution of the Burn 1 mechanic over time in Weiss. What makes Burn 1s good now, how its effectiveness has been improved by its pairings with other mechanics, all sorts of good stuff. So shuffle your decks, tap or cut. We'll get right into the refresh point with some breaking news. Oh my lord, it's Overlord.
Yeah, it's the boogeyman that everybody was afraid of, and we were all happy that it had not been announced at all. So we were more than content after a few, Bushiroad announcements to think that maybe we would be spending some time without it. But it turns out we won't be. Overlord will be coming right in hot during the fall regional time. So brace yourself.
Brace yourself.
It's coming.
We will discuss it later in this episode, but in the other breaking news, DAL 2 is releasing. By the time this episode drops, it will have been the previous week. So it's legal now when you're hearing this. And so the new Katori combo, potentially the new bar combo, I think it's on Origami, a few other things to really buff up the set a little bit after it got kneecapped entirely by the choice restrict, and then a little bit buffed back by Data Bullet.
So we're getting a lot of variations now for Data Live, which is nice. I think you can tell that the choice setup seems to be the one with the highest floor. You've got two very reasonable combos that you can put together to increase your hand dramatically and to, send your opponent to the Shadow Realm. Basically, your finisher's got some very high volume output. So that's nice. There's some more ambitious builds, we'll say. We have the 8 bar with Realizer in a more conservative sort of game plan, and then you have, of course, the 8 wind deck with the twins, where you can really get ambitious. If you're good at triggering climaxes, this is the deck. If you find yourself triggering a lot of climaxes when you play Weiss Schwarz, this is the build you want.
Just play wind. Just do it.
Yeah,
trigger them all.
You don't have to worry about contesting the power of the board whenever you can just make characters disappear.
Absolutely. In JP, a few things were announced for the 15th anniversary. Love Live's School Idol Fest 2. There's a Bang Dreams set.
Of course there is.
Boji the Rock, which people are anticipating coming to English as well. And JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders, Stone Ocean, Premium Boosters. Hope and pray that we can get it in English.
It feels like this is the least that they could do for JoJo fans after the set dropped.
After Golden Wind, yeah.
That set dropped through the floor when it dropped.
Yeah.
So hopefully they do a better job for your JoJo enthusiasts out there to create some cards that...
Dude, they're just going to make They're going to make a Star Platinum finisher just Escanor.
If there's one thing I don't need, it's another Escanor.
It's another Escanor. I will say I took a look through the set whenever it was announced, just to double back on like if any of the cards in the set would work, and I was like, oh, never mind. Every plussing combo, every plussing utility, searches, salvages, adds Golden Wind.
Well,
and I was like, well, that's life.
I guess the upside there is most of those cards are not very good anyway.
Exactly.
You'll be happy to be rid of them.
Yeah, no kidding.
So we'll see how that develops. It'll be a while before we hear anything. The backlog of previews and sets coming out is huge. So it's a great time to be getting into the game. It's a great time to be continuing with the game. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it feels like we're just releasing a ton of sets this year. So that's really nice.
And with that news out of the way, it's time for the Spike Corner. San Gabriel wrapped up, and everybody in California went out and was like, well, you know what? You want lists? We've got lists. And again, though, Nino, Escanor, and another list. One. It's crazy. I could have never imagined that happening in my lifetime. Isn't that right, Steve?
Well, for me, I'm proud that a Kanata Marine deck was finally able to push it over the finish line.
Yeah.
It always the bridesmaid, never the bride. But in this case, we finally got there.
With Nino and Escanor.
Another victory for Kanata Marine. So, congrats to that team.
Honest Weiss Schwarz.
Honest Weiss Schwarz is the most ironic name they could have thought of while piloting Nino Escanor.
That's their channel name.
Is it?
Yeah, that's their YouTube channel name. That's them. That's the group.
That's a very.
They're the homies.
Yeah.
Go check them out. They have videos. They're also featured on Tress's Collectibles, which we'll also be discussing later on in discussing this regional. But yes, Honest Weiss Schwarz are the winners, and they've got some cool stuff. So,
I think we're talking about Nino, Escanor, Kanata Marine, and when you hear those sort of terms, you are probably fairly certain that you know exactly what you're looking at. And in the case of two of the decks, I would say that is likely to be true. The Kanata Marine deck, very standard stuff. The Nino deck, relatively standard stuff. But
Escanor,
we're taking a twist on Escanor.
It's a little bit of a twist.
Yeah.
So it is a 4-Stoxel, 4-choice deck. So it's not trying to high roll on just as many 2-soul triggers as can realistically be jammed into the deck. It's running the Liz combo alongside the 4-choice, and it's got some other tools to actually contest the board as well as some other deck movement stuff.
So we get some flavor here. We get the on attack give power, or on place give power Meliodas combined with the there's like a Bartra, I think the character's name is.
You're looking at him. He's right there on your screen.
He gives he lets you bounce characters back whenever he attacks, which is good for repeating
Lost Vein,
re-repeating the 2k power gain, saving
Nanashi.
Correct. Repeating Nanashi, repeating if you have to attack with Elizabeth, which sometimes happens when you're trying to really maximize your advantage engine. You know, you put a Liz in the front and you just kind of go with it. This guy will let you pull it back and reuse it, so that's nice. There's a lot of we're starting to see adaptations now where Escanor decks are starting to hone in on the cards that really matter in specific matchups where they can struggle. So it's interesting to see the movement away from the 2-1. It feels like the 2-1 can never truly backfire, but it does have some issues if you get anti-early countered or something like this, then it can really spoil your hand fixing. So I guess that this reduces your risk, so there's that. All the other pieces looking fairly standard. It's an Escanor deck.
It is
a deck with a
Escanor
plan.
deck.
Yeah.
Yep. A few different cards here and there. There is a Hauser and that for like a salvage additional on top of the Meliodas that's generally run. That has like a more guaranteed salvage.
Yeah, that's for, picking up the last piece or if you need a level 3 and you're struggling to pick it up with Elizabeth. You do need some more targeted selection in situations where normally the 2/1 Meliodas, you'll get one of those a game probably, and when it combos off, you'll pick up some level 3 pieces that are harder to pick up with Elizabeth because the deck doesn't tend to easily give 3s. You need to mill one, so the more you add to your hand, the harder it's going to be to add more to your hand in the future. But having some targeted selection makes things slightly easier for you. So that Hauser is very straightforward. Pitch a card, get a better card.
Yeah. As well, the stock swap is in the list at level 3. And the Top Check X Elizabeth 3/2, I believe it's a Tourless early play.
So you see a few different choice mechanisms. There's a copy of the Meliodas 0/0 that checks up to 4
card,
for anything. Because it is possible, one of the struggles this deck can have is getting the choice in hand at the right time. Especially, not in this particular variant, we're running 4 choices, which is strongly mitigating this risk. But in the 6 Stock Soul 2 choice builds, there have been games I've seen where the choice just will not yield to hand. And if you
Climax Swappers and Stalker Clog, choice still in the decks, like any of these will just happen sometimes when you only run 2 choice.
Right. So this, this gives you some additional speed, and it gives you the chance of ripping climaxes in the late game if you need to rip climaxes, and it's cheaper than running Elizabeth, or cheaper than jamming Elizabeth. But either one will work. We see a copy of the stock swap. That feels very reasonable in situations where your opponent is hard compressing you, but I don't agree with this choice just because compression is not a victory condition against Escanor, so you just shouldn't care. Because there's no amount of compressing that you're going to be able to do that is going to save you from ones.
Just kill harder.
Yeah, that's kind of the deal. Is there's too many damage points coming down to be able to say, well, we can just compress it out. It's like, well, that's not going to happen. So,
well, speaking of Escanor, one of the things that Escanor hates is a board that's hexproof and that you can't bounce. And in the second place team, coming in hot, we've got a Bang Dreamless Choice Pants with the early play 3/2 that is given hexproof by this 2/1, absolutely massive, destroys your board, and a few other tools. So walk me through it. I'm not a Bang Dream enthusiast.
So this is pretty much the Bang. This is the Bang Dream deck that was patrolling around last year. Mm-hmm. There was when Choo-Choo and Pareo combo was put out. So for those who haven't faced this or aren't familiar with Bang Dream, Choo-Choo and Pareo are a 3/2 and 2/1 respectively, and the 2/1 gives the 3/2 5,500 power, 2,000 power, and can't be chosen, can't be auto reversed, and twin drive. And then it gives itself 5,500 power and hand on core.
Because why not?
Right.
Just have the assist that can also contest the board.
The Choo-Choo, yeah, pretty much. The Choo-Choo is a 2 or fewer early play that heals on Encore Step, and then 1,000 for each music character in the backstage. So if you have a full backstage, 11k plus the other 2k plus hexproof and can't be bombed and twin drive and
all this stuff.
So the only risk that this sort of early play scheme has is if the game goes very quickly, it can deplete your stock, which is why you see the Lisa finisher here, because the Lisa finisher is very cheap on your resources. It clones itself by paying 1, so you can rapidly produce a board full of danger for very little stock. And that lets you lean harder into your mid game. The other problem with Chutu and Pareo is if you randomly block 3 times after a fresh deck, you're not gonna get Chutu and Pareo because you don't have super great ways to deplete the deck super quickly. The 1-0 combo does deplete the deck very, very fast, but you will have to play kind of a scuffed mid game if your level 2 game is basically your level 1 game again. So that's a bit of an annoyance. It's one of those times in Weiss Schwarz where you just don't want to block too much, but if you do, it can really scuff you. So you don't. You can't control it. It just is what it is.
And I think this deck was already around. I think it still just has all of the same strengths that it's always had, and it's still a deck that can win.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're familiar with how to pilot it, I do see 4 memory counters in this deck. So there's a 0% chance that you won't get hit with one of these things if you try to front Chutu or Pareo for that matter.
Yeah.
So
either one of them.
That is a lot. That is a lot of memory counters. So they clearly identified that as part of their win con. It's sending something to memory.
Anything really.
Yeah, I guess there are
standby targets.
There's some full field. Yes.
Like in the format.
There's definitely some full field characters that you want to disrupt. There's also, yes, Nino needs more to be able to climb a Chutu plus memory counter. Chutu plus memory counter is going to be 16k without anything, with just a full back row.
Yeah.
And 1 Pareo. If you have 2 Pareos,
imagine if we just have 2 Pareos.
It's just impossible. The board's too big. So you can patrol decks that want to control the board, and you can punish pretty decisively if you need full field. So that's nice. The 1-0 combo, I'm not a tremendous fan of. It's very reasonable. But it requires you to ditch a character, and then you can check 5 and add 2 characters. So you do have to ditch a character. So if your hand is complicated, like it doesn't like you don't want to let go of what you've got. That's tough. Sometimes you have to trade something you want for 2 things you kind of want, or don't really want. But that's part of the deck. You see there's no events here, so that's part of it. If you don't run any events, it's very easy to have unlimited selection from this combo. It is interesting. The builds that were around a bit last year started to try and adapt red into the build so that they could run Buns for Luck.
Right.
And because Buns for Luck can be such a terror. But I think what you're starting to see is that finishers are starting to get cheaper and cheaper, and so players just aren't hoarding as much stock, it seems like. At least what I've observed in my local environment is that Nino and Escanor and Kanata and Marine, these finishers are super, super cheap. Lisa's another one, super cheap. Very low stock requirement to absolutely drop all of it on you. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Or it does increase the consistency, though.
Absolutely. And paired up with the banking list, 8 standby Fantasia Bunko.
If you told me that there was going to be one of these in the top 4, I just wouldn't have believed you.
But here it is, Steve. It's right there in front of your face. With the sold out event, with all 8 standbys, all the staples. There's the restander. That's Kurumi and another character that I can't remember off the top of my head. So I'm not even looking at it. But it's there. It's the standard 8x Fantasia Bunko list.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is a heal down and defend list. So, like many 8 standby decks, you're in a situation where you want to keep the game nice and slow, and you want to grip the board with an absolute death grip and refuse to let it go. You don't have tremendous finishing ability in this build. You do have restand, you do have clock kick, but ultimately those are pretty modest finishing tools. You do have the Miku support character who can spam heals over and over again, so if the game is slow and you're able to just strangle your opponent with resources, then you'll have plenty of time to just heal down and continually harass your opponent.
I mean, you know what? Sometimes all you gotta do is stand by.
The double -2 souls event is nasty, and there are many decks that will struggle to push through that event, especially if you're already getting beat down on the board. It can be extremely frustrating to deal with that sort of defensive mechanic in the late game. This is very reminiscent of kind of the older school of standby, where your strategy wasn't to overwhelm your opponent with combos. Your strategy was to overwhelm your opponent with board presence.
I mean, it literally is the old standby strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It just is.
But if you've played against newer standby decks, if you played against MTI or Dao, you'll see Nino, you'll see the adaptation where you have a deck that not only can tussle for the board, but it has this additional finishing utility off in the distance that is reasonable, not extremely destructive, but reasonable, but also it's there. Whereas in these sorts of builds, you're seeing a lot of empty standbys. We don't care what they do. We don't care what they're attached to.
Just get bodies on the board.
Yes, we want to be as thick as possible and pummel our opponent with vanillas. So that's what this sort of deck is meant to do. We have we have anti-early counters, we have lots and lots of thick bodies and characters that can give 1500 to all, and then combo to give 1500 to all. So when you have double 3k to all, you're just gonna swarm the board with power. So that's kind of what this deck does, and it's very honest. Speaking of honest, Weiss Schwarz, this deck is very honest. It doesn't try to do anything deceptive. It's just going to put big guys on the board and dare you to beat them. So
that's all it is. And speaking of MTI, it's also here. It's back in the top 8s in our lives. This one is an 8 standby list, but Tressa's Collectibles, or Shizukatsu from Tressa's Collectibles, made an excellent profile of his own list. That team, they went undefeated in Swiss. He went undefeated with his MTI list, and they just happened to lose to this team, actually, in the first round of the top 8.
That's unbelievable. If the two MTI decks splashing green were to be on opposite sides.
But I don't know that they were on opposite sides, but we don't have to spend the most time here, because I actually do just recommend going to Tressa's and looking at that profile, because it's very detailed. He explains all of the cards present very well, but we can dive into a little bit, kind of like the newness that is not exactly always present in the old 8x MTI lists. So, we have now this 3-2 stock healer, or sorry, not stock healer, this 3-2 early play healer that can switch into a different Rugier that downs the entire board's power by 1,000 times their level at the climax phase. So, Shizukatsu in his video was talking about, you essentially just did this so that you could loop the heal, because you can bounce it without bringing out the 3-2. You can bounce it regardless. It's similar in essence to the Gorilla Grodd in Batman. Like, if you front it, you can just bounce it to pay the cost, and then not do the effect, because it's choose up to 1 in your hand to play it to the board. And then you just want to loop healing with that and just sit on your massive board of Ghislaines and I forget
Paul.
No, not even Paul. Well, I guess in the 8x list, Paul. But in Shizukatsu's list, he was just standbys, some other Ghislaine, or what's the level 1 combo? Eris. Finally, okay. And just sit on that board, because when you bounce your healer, you just trigger another standby and then just have a full board again, and then just, just keep playing the game.
It's difficult to employ these sorts of strategies because you are relying on the old compress and block strategy, and that strategy does have its limits. If you're very good at controlling your deck, these are the type of strategies that you can employ. This deck is doing basically all the similar standby tricks that everybody has seen a million times before. We have Eris, we have all the usual suspects from a zero perspective, but you start to see the adaptation where if you can't run the tap counter because you want to contest the board, then you're going to need another way to keep the game slow.
Here's Sylph.
And so we have 4 copies of the Sylph event. And Sylph. And
right.
so the Sylph event is a 4K counter, which is already
massive,
super obnoxious.
On your board? Yeah. This'll do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can pitch a second copy of itself to give the character anti-damage. This is very good against some finishers, but what it's really good against is getting pummeled in the mid game. Standby decks always want to keep the game as slow as possible, and so if you think that your opponent's about to trigger a 4 or 5 with their early play level 3 game, you can keep the game very slow without spending a whole lot of resources. This thing costs 1. So it's basically pay 1 and pitch 2 to delete an attack. And there are definitely circumstances where if you've played Weiss Schwarz for any competitive sense, or for very long, you will have those games where you see 15 to 20 damage cards, very few climaxes, and all you need to do is get one more turn, and you can get it all clear and get back to a good deck state. And if you can prevent one of those big hammers from landing by using Sylph, then that powers your heal engine, that allows you to keep the game very slow and strangle your opponent even more. Because even though we're in a time period where finishing is better than it's ever been, you still are going to struggle to finish from like 2-2 or less. I mean, even Escanor is not liking those sort of circumstances. And speaking of Escanor, this forces him to sculpt the Gilthunder piece, guaranteed. He definitely cannot play around this card very easily. So he wants to bounce so that he can have at least one lane where he can assert. And that's another attractive piece of this, is that the 2-1 event doesn't require anything. It's just no.
It's no. And also there's the yellow 0 that lets you kick to stock.
Yes.
In reverse. Amazing for contesting Nino boards.
Yeah, this has been a splash for a while in a lot of MTI builds, where if you're facing standby, you can sculpt this thing, and with your first Eris, or as soon as it happens to show up, and you can put it down on the board and just absolutely bully your opponent with it.
Doc. All right, we're almost at the end of the Spike Corner with 2 more fun lists. There was a standby Sora Marine list that was interesting.
Yeah, I think everybody is pivoting to...
Everybody's got some kind of different Hololive list.
Well, you're seeing the adaptation now with the Rudyard build, with this build, with the Fantasia Boonco build. Everybody is pivoting towards defense because everybody is out there seeking the answer for Escanor. They want to slow that deck down. They want to punish that deck. They want to make it very difficult for that deck to be able to play. And so you're starting to see all the minus souls finishers, all the minus souls counters, all the you can't deal damage to me counters, all the you can't deal damage to me characters, excuse me. You're going to see Bang Dream available in competitive play very soon. And that's another piece that's going to add more anti-damage, more anti-souls to the game, which are all focused in one direction, which is to try and slow down some of these really devastating finishers so you don't just get absolutely blown out.
And hear me out. We've got some other devastating finishers that have made it to the top 4. 2 8-bar lists, Kobayashi and Ozymandias. Fake Grand or to Camelot. The Buddha and Ozymandias go on a trip to California. I don't know who you are, you mad lad that played this list, but I appreciate you. Praise the sun.
It's one of those decks that can only... These are the types of decks that come up in Springfest. I feel like a broken record whenever I say it, but it's true. In Springfest, I highly encourage you to play the decks that you are the most comfortable with, because I guarantee whoever is playing this 8-bar Fate Grand Order Camelot / Babylonia deck is... This person's been playing this deck for the last ever. And
dude, I mean, you know, if you're out there and you listen to this podcast and you haven't been, just let us know. I'm just curious, because there's a few curious things on the list too. It doesn't run the Resonate. There's a Resonate that lets you resonate the finisher to check 3, similar to, I think, just like there's like Chomp Chomp Megumin or something.
They're very there's all kinds of. It's the Fair Union.
There we go. And it lets you just pay 1 and just go to Climax in your 8-bar list to salvage a guy, which I thought was very reasonable. And he was like, "No, I'm gonna run just a normal salvage brainstorm instead." And I was like, "You know, fair enough. It does mill 4 instead of 3." And yeah, there's like a few things about it that are neat. And in the 8-bar Kobayashi list, Clock Tower also had a good discussion about it in their San Gabriel breakdown. 8-bar Kobayashi is real. It's a real enough list. It can loop the combo very easily. It can get rid of its bars for value very easily. And whenever it gets to its finisher, it can just kill you.
Alright, well, so walk me through some of this. I know that you are very experienced with the Kobayashi set, having played it in both languages.
We're gonna run this through a little quickly.
The 1-0 bar is pretty common. You know, that's an advantage engine that's been well explored.
Check 3, add 1.
Yep.
Nice and easy. But the nice things about, like, the kind of adjustments that were made in this list that I like the most are 2 copies of a yellow Ilulu 1/1 that pays for itself if you have a full board and becomes just an 8/5. And then, hear me out, you've got this JC that gives 1/5 to a character, so now it's a 10k. You play a Climax, it's an 11k. You're killing something at level 1.
Yeah, that's absolutely huge.
Yeah, and it can be free. And another Trial Deck special coming in hot is this 2/1 green Elma in color. Nice. Gets 1k power for every other thing on the board when you play it. And then, memory some guy in reverse.
So
hard removal.
Yeah, I mean, a 12k that can remove to memory is going to annoy Nino. It's going to annoy Kaneda if you get big enough. It's one of those things where that sort of removal is difficult to play around, because you have to start... Anytime you can make a deck hold more pieces than they want to hold, it can be to your advantage. Forcing an Escanor deck to hold Guild Thunder is to your advantage. Forcing a deck that plays in the mid game to hold their counters is to your advantage. This costs very little to force your opponent to respond to it or lose their guy. So if I'm paying 2 stock for an early play and you're playing 1 stock to remove them, if I have to pay 3 stock in order to keep them, that still feels kind of like a win.
This deck doesn't even play a healer, by the way. It's just sending it on all cylinders. You have your Climax Stitch to salvage that will bounce the hand every time you play the bar that's in your hand, so that you can ditch another bar next turn to loop your 1 combo again. You just keep looping your 1 combo. You kill everything you see with the Elma and the 1/1 Ilulu. You get to level 3. You play down this combo. It's what is it? Pay 1 when you play the Climax, and then when it cancels damage, this card has base 3 soul. So you play the combo as base 4 soul. When damage is canceled, it does the same amount of damage per the card's soul.
Right.
And then if you attack and you reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's a character, you burn 1.
So we get burn 1, and then on cancel, very likely
Burn 4.
So that's the type of combo that worked really well in other builds. It seems very reminiscent of the Quince Door combo with a slightly different flavor. Not quite as strong in my opinion. It's got a slightly weaker trigger, and then what's most notable about the Irulu is that it doesn't have any on-play effect, which means the rest of the game kind of needs to be going pretty well in order for this to happen. The upside is, and the other downside is, this thing is expensive. You have to pay for it on the climax play, which means you need 9 stock if you want to triple, which is, that's getting on the high side.
You're probably getting 2.
Double is much more reasonable, and they included an off finisher because...
An Icy Tail.
Yes, because it is... If you've played this deck for a little bit, you probably are familiar with the fact that like 9 stock is not going to happen frequently. So we have a Toru off finisher. It's got draw and ditch, which is nice. It lets you get a little reset, or it lets you help maybe if you somehow don't have the right bar, maybe you can draw into the right bar or the character that can swap it. And then you get pitch 2 to Icy Tail 4, which is you diversify the cost of your finishers. You're going to be able to get all of them off. That's just good Weiss Schwarz. So you don't want to have everything costing stock or everything costing hand. You need to balance those costs so that you can get all the effects that you think you can get. So a very reasonable build. This is the build that 8 bar was kind of the build that kicked around in Japan after some adaptation. So it's good to see high diversity, because while it is very fun to talk about Nino and Escanor every single week, it's good to see some diversity, and it sends a signal to competitive players that it's more about good play than it is about what you're playing. If you're comfortable, if you're familiar, if the deck is reasonable, then I think you can do really well.
Yeah, and I know our past few Spike Corners have felt like, let's look at the regionals and do mini deck profiles of all of the top lists, which, fair. But in the future, we'll also endeavor to talk about some other aspects of competitive play and just other stuff about trying to get good at the card game.
Yeah, I think we have lots of room to talk about specific mechanics or specific strategies that have worked for me in the past, have worked for you in the past, or that we've just seen at regional play that players can take with them to those events and hopefully have better success.
And now, finally, here comes a new challenger. It's the Skeleton Man. So Overlord 2 is coming, and so not exactly a deck of the week. It's not out yet, but it's a deck that will come. It's seen play in Japan, and we see it coming. It's on the horizon, and we can take a look at how it works now to prepare ourselves for it. So how does the incoming Skeleton Man fare into the English meta when it comes out?
We've got a... The reason we're talking about this so prematurely, this set doesn't drop for months.
Yeah.
But this set is very high tier in Japan. They have high regard for the set. I have high regard for the set after watching it be played. And it's one of those things that if you are interested in the game from a competitive perspective, you want to have this deck on your radar. If you don't want to play it, you at least need to acknowledge its overwhelming mid-game and how it can translate that into a very strong end game. So let's talk about it really quickly. We'll just do a very high-level overview. We won't go over everything this deck can do. It has many tools, and as we get closer to release date, we can get more detailed about the types of builds you can make with this. Today, we're just going to talk about the most obvious build, which is Door Bar. So we have the 1-0 door combo, shell tiered combo. So very reasonable on reverse salvage, but when it salvages, it's also a fever style mechanic if you're not familiar with this mechanic because it wasn't used frequently. it's not just on reverse salvage. It's on reverse or on empty salvage. So you can't dodge it. You can't dodge it by leaving the lane empty. It will get the value anyway, and when it does, it goes to memory, and then it comes back from memory on the follow-up turn. So, what does this mean? This is very good at resisting the standard combo loops that happen with on reverse salvage. So frequently when you have a combo that has on reverse salvage, you don't want to triple it, because if you triple it, then you're gonna have a hard time repeating it if the game goes slowly, because all of the copies will be in the waiting room. But with Shaltir, you have no fear. You can just jam all 3 of them on the board, get the value, escape to memory, and then re-get the value again if you happen to have a second door, which is an excellent value engine. It really slows down your need to clock, and it can pick up discrete pieces, which is always good when you have these sort of combo setups. So speaking of combo setups, we can talk about Ains now.
Eins Organ. Here we go. So, there's a few moving pieces here. So you're gonna need to follow along a little bit if you're on audio. If you're watching on YouTube, I've taken the time to diligently put the card up on the screen. So just look at the screen for a little bit. You know, you might have been doing some chores up until now. If you want to figure out what this Eins does, look at the screen real quick, and we can figure it all out together.
Let's start with the level 0 first.
Here's a level 0 that can early play the 3/2 Eins. I think it has another effect, which doesn't really matter because this thing just says you can early play the 3/2 Eins. The 3/2 Eins is your finisher. It combos with a bar and also with an event. The event is a 1/1 green event. You can play it to salvage. Nice. You do need an Eins on the board. Important.
It also gives you a power pump.
Also gives you a power pump. Why not? Then, you're going to play the 3/2 early out with a 0 at level 2. You're going to play it with a 1/1 Eins. This 1/1 Eins is the sauce. This gives it everything. It gives it hexproof on the opponent's turn. Cannot be reversed on the opponent's turn. The opponent itself cannot be reversed on the opponent's turn. So you can't bomb it because your bomb won't reverse. It'll just side. It'll be there. And it also makes the event costless.
Yes, it makes the event free, which is a huge, huge benefit.
Yes. And
So
finally,
all of those effects are on bar.
yes,
We have to have it. We can't not have it.
we gotta have the bar. And finally, on the 3/2 itself, when you attack, there's a few things that will happen. It'll heal on climax play.
Yes.
On attack, you can marker up to 5 of the event, which you can play up to 5 in the deck, up to 5 of the event in the waiting room underneath it. This is where that hexproof comes in, the can't be bombed, the can't remove comes in for the deck. It's very important that you get these events underneath it, and then the next time you combo, you can send all of them into memory. And that's the second part of this event, is at the beginning of your encore step, you can pay 1, ditch 1 for each event in memory, and burn 1. Additionally, if you've already done both of those things with your main 3/2 combo, you can also just burn 1.
Yeah, so once you have the events in memory, pretty much every bar from that point on is a heal 1 and a burn 1 from every Eins on the board.
Yes.
So what do we have here? We have a dramatic amount of finishing power, and we also have maybe the stickiest early play in the history of Weiss Schwarz. There is very little counterplay for this card. So let's briefly discuss what counterplay does exist.
Anti-change counters! Da-da-da-da!
Yes.
If your set has an anti-early punch, you want to death grip it.
Yeah, and it's even better if the anti-early punch sends them somewhere far away, like the bottom of the deck, or to stock. Or
If you're a Beaufort enthusiast like I am, you can memory that Eins.
Right. So we definitely want to keep Eins off the board if we can with the anti-change counter falls into a very small window where you can have some counterplay.
There's also one more effect that we forgot to mention for the Ainz. Whenever he sends all of the events from under him into memory, he can also kill something on your board for each event that is sent to memory. So, goodbye Brainstormer, goodbye back row support, and if he has all the events, I mean, just goodbye to your whole board.
Yeah, that can be a source of frustration if you are level 3 and you are wanting to kind of, or if you have, let's say you have Sora and you want to try and wall up against it, he can just blow them all up.
Yep.
And along with your Brainstorm, so you can't save her, and the amount of disruption that comes from this card is dramatic.
Yes.
But the other answer that we have, other than anti-change counters, is we just don't care about targeting. What we're going to do is blow the entire board up. There are very few of these in the game. They do exist. They're almost exclusively in the HoloLive set.
Yeah.
So
at level 2, yeah, it's only going to be in HoloLive. It's the incoming Suisse combo from HoloLive 2.
You also have the Hato. The Hato,
and Hato, but that's at level 3.
Right? If we can respond to a full board of Ainz by pressing the detonator and sending them all far away. So they're
But at that point you're at level 3.
Yes.
And nothing is good.
It's a difficult situation already. What else can we do? We can also, hexproof. We can get hexproof. That helps. Ainz can't blow you up if you're hexproof.
And the only incoming. So by the time this deck is legal, Slime 3 will be legal as well, which does have a fully hexproof board. Incoming with the Shuna assist and the Nguyen Brainstormer. So there is some counterplay incoming, but on God, the realist answer is if you just hit this deck as hard as possible and accelerate them, they do not like it.
Yes, much like many other decks that want the level 2 game to be slow, similar to Kanata Marine, similar to many other builds that are trying to grind you at 2, if they Ainz combo and then you push them to 3, it is a very difficult game for them because the event setup takes 2 bars. We need a bar to get all the markers, then we need a second bar to get all of the markers into memory so that we can pay whatever and ditch whatever to finish the game. So if they don't have enough bars, it's very bad. If they can't find bars, it's very bad.
If the one game goes poor, it's very bad. If they don't have an Ainz to play events with, it's very bad. So on, so forth.
There's one other piece to this that is probably notable, that is very big, and it is the fact that they also are in possession of a rest counter. So that is another piece that they can use to keep the game slow. You will likely be forced to front against, if they have multiple Ainzes, it will be very difficult to play around this sort of tap counter because the board will be full of 3s. Side attacking isn't really a strategy at that point in the game. So that's another piece that they have where they can expend a whole bunch of resources to keep the game slow. It is very expensive, as all tap counters are, but if they're already in good shape, this will make them in better shape, and if they're in a sort of weak deck state, they can use this to stall you out. So that's kind of all we want to cover on Overlord right now, just because it's pretty far away still, so we can just pretend like it's not happening, at least for a little while, until we get some more tools to deal with it. And we can talk about those tools as they appear. The incoming Sword Art Online set is the type of set that Overlord is not very interested in facing, because their level 1 game will bully the Overlord level 1 game strongly. So we can talk about all that as we get closer to it, but for now, let's turn ourselves towards some older stuff.
It's back to old versus new, and today we're going to talk about bird ones for a hot second. They came into the game near the very beginning.
Yeah, if you look at any of the first 3 sets that that were released for Weiss Schwarz, I mean, we've been burning 1 since there was any burning at all.
Yep. But the burn ones have changed a little over time.
That's a bit of an understatement, but that is absolutely true.
So in the very beginning, we're looking at like burn 1, like by itself is kind of a premium in the early days of Weiss Schwarz, right?
Absolutely.
I think you had mentioned there's a Little Busters card. There's P2 rest to burn 1. Persona 3, there's like an event.
Yeah, it's an event, pay 1, burn 1.
Yep.
Just straight up, that occupies 4 slots in a deck in 2012.
Yeah, and in just a lot of these early sets, there's just finishers where it's a climax combo, on attack, burn 1, Trouble Girl Hari. Anybody?
Yeah. So you start to see the adaptation. It starts with a card that burns 1.
Yeah.
Then it becomes a climax combo that can burn 1.
Right.
And then it becomes multiple burn 1s. Or burn 1 and something.
And in the burn 1 and something category, there for like an older example in GGO, there's a Len, or on play, you milled 3 cards. If there's a character, minus 2,000. If there's 2 characters, minus another 4,000. And if there were 3 characters, burn 1, and climax combo, burn another 1.
Yeah, so that's a great example of a card that has this wheel effect where if we wheel the right 3 things, then we hit the jackpot and we get everything.
Yep.
But
then also burn 1.
Yeah, and so we have a slightly inconsistent version of it, but that's kind of the adaptation. Is it starts very slowly, very reasonably with pay 1, burn 1, and pay 2, burn 1 on a character. Then we adapt it. We now have burn 1 on combo, and then sometimes we'll get some other effects. And it just
no, it has 2 burn 1s on the card because there's the wheel and then the climax.
That's what I mean. Is like we'll get a burn 1. Sometimes we'll get more. But we always get 1.
We always get 1.
And there's tons of examples of those throughout the history of Weiss.
In the last episode, that Elma finisher that has an unlimited appetite, burn 1.
Yeah,
attack. That's
absolutely.
the combo.
Yeah, we get this on cancel effect, but also we get burn 1.
Yep.
And so the first Weiss Schwarz deck I ever built and played was a Persona 4 deck, because Persona 4 is the set that got me into the game. And I was such a tremendous fan of the series, and so I went to look, and apparently I was very pleased to find out that Persona 4 was good at this time.
Yeah.
And the reason it was good is because it had a burn 1 style finisher.
Yu-Gi-Oh!
Right. And it's not even on climax. It's just attack, reveal. Does it have Fan or Yukata? Burn 1, and it's got hand on court. And we can change into it eventually. It's
nice.
A draw phase change. You can have it next turn. If the game goes reasonably, everything's fine. If it doesn't go reasonably, well, maybe they'll just die.
We've used Starlight in the trial deck. The trial deck was good because you had this 3-2 that on play, if there's a character on top of the deck, burn 1, pay 1 when it's attacked, bounce it. And so you can loop the burn 1. It was crazy.
Yeah, we get the repeat burn 1s.
Yeah.
So we go from burn 1 in an event to burn 1 with a character reliably to burn 1 with a character somewhat unreliably but free.
Yeah.
To burn 1 on combo with some other stuff.
Yeah.
And then we start to see as the game matures.
There's a podcast.
Shout out to Burn 1. Those guys have been producing great content pretty much the entire time it's existed. So
yeah, we have a podcast, and then we also have more burn 1s. How do you make burn 1 better?
Yes,
you add more of them.
So kind of the problem with burn 1 is that it's very consistent. 1 damage is very hard to block in Weiss Schwarz. If you've ever played against these style of finishers, burn 1 is very tilting, because if it blocks, it's very bad for the follow-up attack. If it doesn't block, then you're just slowly getting picked apart by these very small, consistent damage sources. So,
and that's what the burn ones of the present are now. Kaguya.
Yeah, so Mikasa was kind of the first.
Mikasa?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was 2017 and beyond, and there was kind of a reign of terror for Attack on Titan for a while, where if you were playing competitively during that time, you definitely remember there was a time where this deck was everywhere and it was unreasonably difficult to defeat. And part of the reason it was so difficult to defeat is they had this finisher that it could control its souls very well because of the way the climax worked. It could control its damage very well, and it had burn 1 on attack and then pay 2 on reverse and burn 1 again. So we're burning 1 3 times guaranteed if we get 3 of them.
Yep.
And then we're burning 1 even more depending on how well the game's gone so far. So, was it tripleable? Not really. Not really. It was very expensive. The chance of you having that much stock and your opponent still being in the game, highly unlikely. But you could just kind of pick your opponent apart very slowly with these sort of repeated small damage sources. And then you start to see it adapt even further with Kaguya. Kaguya is the kind of the advanced version of Mikasa, where we have 2 burn 1s, but they're set up in a way that is much more reasonably costed. The chance of you tripling becomes much, much higher. You only need 7 stock to triple, which is very easy for most modern Weiss decks to put together. You do need a bit more hand size, but hand size is one of those things that comes together a lot easier nowadays. So we have this adaptation where it's pay 1, burn 1, and then on reverse, ditch 1, burn 1. So,
and you have Words of Parting in the newest set, just in case it wasn't good enough.
Yeah, so we're seeing a huge increase in consistency with these type of builds, where repeated burn 1s, if you're level 3, it is not safe to be level 3 in Weiss Schwarz. There was a time when you could be level 3 and it was very reasonable for you to live from 3-0, because getting 7 damage down against a relatively compressed deck was tough, because finishers just weren't that good at doing damage that way.
But
now it is very dangerous to be level 3, and if your opponent is set up for it, it is very likely that you will not get to live 2 turns of level 3. It is nearly impossible in the modern game to live from those points.
And I think in the modern game, like finishers with repeated burn 1s have become this kind of de facto, dude, if you're level 3, no. Like, out of all of the finishers, like Marine, even like it's 2-3, 2-3, 2-3. There's like a world, you know?
Yeah.
There's like a land where we can cancel this all out.
Well,
because,
let's say you're 3-0, right?
You know?
All I need to do is block the 3s.
Yeah.
And it's just 3 blocks.
Yeah.
And 3 blocks is not a big ask.
But if you have like 6 burn 1s coming down and 3 3s, yo, this is perilous.
So the first time you start to see these like very dangerous sort of burn 1 finishers is the Tokyo Revengers finisher.
Yeah.
So
you wanna go to McDonald's?
Yeah.
You can go to McDonald's.
Yeah. So all you need is 8 stock and a fistful of cards, and your opponent is in danger, because you are about to drop 3 vanillas and then 5 1s.
And not even just that, because of the way that dual laners operates in the English meta, right? Because you're playing, most likely, the Draken combo. You just play it. And so, if you have a premium of stock, which you likely do, play Draken, mill 2, oh I saw a soul, burn 1, burn 2, burn 3, here's or one of those numbers, not all 3 of those, but burn one of those numbers, play a second Draken, mill 2, burn 2. Did you take one of those? Great. And now we play Baji, and now we swing 3 more times.
And
then you go swing a 4th time, and you go to McDonald's.
Yeah, and so when we're talking about 10 plus packets, those are numbers that are very difficult to survive.
Yeah.
Even without Draken. Even if it was just 4 vanillas and 5 ones.
And imagine they just have another Mikey in hand, so one of those vanillas was already an extra burn one.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where if you have an odd chunk of your deck that just happens to allow one of these 3s or 4s to score on you, you lose. Because the 5 ones is going to get the job done.
Ones will kill.
And if you're already 3 and you take one of these odd hits, then it's kind of over. And so that sort of pressure from those kind of finishers really changes the way that people play the game. Now we put a premium on keeping our HP low enough to where we can't get absolutely blasted by our opponent's level 3 game. So it's not safe to be 2-4. It's not completely safe to be 2-4 or 2-5.
Not even 2-3.
Yeah, because depending on your deck state, you could be in significant danger. Because when you're talking about 5 ones, if you're 2-3 and you just take a random 4, you are now in danger. And so you need your HP to be as low as possible. So the pendulum that we push back and forth in Weiss, with damage, those level breakpoints are now a big deal in competitive play. You need to be paying close attention to what your opponent's damage possibilities are. If you're 2-4 and your opponent is 2-5 and you're on the attack, you have to be concerned. If anything hits, they're going to be 3. And can you tolerate their 3 game? If yes, then you can keep going. You can push them as far as you need to. But you can also pump the brakes if you think that you're going to die.
Just side 3 times.
Just stop attacking. There's the difference between being new at Weiss Schwarz and being a little more experienced at Weiss Schwarz is when you're new at Weiss Schwarz, people will tell you the most important thing that you need to accomplish every single turn is attacking 3 times. And they're right. Because every time you leave a slot open and you don't attack, you're opening up yourself to more damage and you're allowing your opponent to get more resources than you. But now it is definitely worthwhile. If you see your opponent has a devastating finisher, you can pump the brakes on that and force them to put themselves to 3. And if they can't, then they have to bring themselves closer, which might leave them in range for your finisher.
Exactly. Is in the modern day and age, in the new world of Weiss, burn 1s are not just burn 1. It's likely burn 1 a lot. And that kind of finishing power is very, with Escanor, even with Kaya, with Overlord incoming, all of these burn 1s are gonna kill ya.
Yeah, and we're seeing dramatic increases in the consistency of finishers now. I thought we could make it through this whole burn 1 segment without Escanor, but we can't. So, yeah, if you haven't faced it yet, you will. If you go to any Springfest, you will see it. It is the most premium finisher in Weiss Schwarz.
It's not even burn 1, technically.
No, it's just packets of 1.
It's just packets of 1. But, apologies for the length of this episode. We've gone a little bit over an hour here. We like to keep it a little below. But San Gabriel just had so much to offer us. There's so many. Just wild and wacky. There was a Konosuba deck we didn't talk about. There was, all sorts of things. Just go to Weiss Tea Time, go to the Spring Master Post, look at all the deck lists, and be in awe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best thing about Springfest is when you get these big events. Your skill will really express itself.
Any deck can win.
Absolutely.
Any deck can win. But with that, that's going to be it for us here in the Refresh Point. We are going to the Georgia Regional with a friend of ours. It will be tomorrow, actually, or in the next 2 days after you are hearing this, or maybe it's already happened. And then the week after that, we'll be able to record our retrospective of that event.
So hopefully we'll see if you listen to the podcast. Hopefully we'll see you there.
We'll see you there. or not. And if not, then we'll see you in Houston because we're in Texas, so we're going to that one for sure.
Absolutely.
And so thank you very much for listening to the Refresh Point. You can take it and go.